Hi, and welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a registered nutritional therapy practitioner and functional medicine practitioner. Join me as we explore thyroid, brain, and fatigue conditions with positivity. From Hashimoto's to multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue to adrenal dysfunction, I've got you covered. With expert advice and tips to help you take action now and inspiring real patient stories from successful individuals who refuse to let their health hold them back. Start your journey to good health today. And don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health. That's GOODE. Or visit my website at nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Welcome to today's episode of the Good Health Podcast. In this episode, I'm inviting Mirella Carlucci onto the podcast to talk all things plant-based nutrition. Mirella is a holistic plant-based nutrition coach and has gone on her own journey of plant-based foods for hormones. She now works with women's health, hormones, and plant-based foods. Let's jump straight into this conversation. Okay, Mirella, welcome to the Good Health Podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Always a great time chatting with you.
Yeah, so I mean, we met a while ago. It's been a good few years now since we sort of met through the industry, through the work that we do. But I'm really interested. What I wanted to sort of really dig into today is sort of, I guess, the main part of what you do, and we'll dig into a little bit around the sort of the gut health and the hormone health that you work with. But the big thing for me is that you are plant-based, and I have this discussion with people a lot. So it's around going complete. Some people want to go completely plant-based. Some people they want to just get more of those plant-based foods in the diet. So I really kind of want to dig into that with you today. But let's kind of start with your story. Let's get to know you a little bit first. So what was your story, your health story? How did you get into working in this field?
Yeah, well, like most of us, it basically started just for health reasons. I think it was in my late 40s, early 50s. I started with all the struggles of perimenopause, I guess you can call them. I started getting this weight gain around the belly area, the sleepless nights, a lot of dry skin and just general dryness. But I had suffered from acne when I was in my teens. And I noticed it started to come back. And it was all concentrated in the jawline area, which is all hormonally driven. So at the time, I didn't realize just the connection between my diet, to the degree that it was. Like, I'd go to the doctor and he'd say, oh, it's normal. Everything's bloody normal with doctors, not to knock doctors because
No,
I
but it's
do
true.
want them if I break my leg. But in fairness to them, they're all restricted to like 10, 15 minutes consults. So, you go there with all these, laundry lists of what's wrong with you, and they basically just try to narrow it down and give you a prescription for one thing. So the first thing, and even in my teens, I was on like heavy, heavy doses of antibiotics for clearing up but not once was my diet ever discussed, which now knowing what I know, it's like, oh my goodness, like how can this be? And there must be thousands, if not millions of people out there with the same issues and yet are being given a prescription.
Yeah, and to us that seems crazy, doesn't it? Like to think like, knowing what we know, to think like that, diet is not discussed for a lot of these conditions.
At all, or lifestyle for that matter,
Yeah, or
right? So
lifestyle. It's mad.
yeah. So I started to do, read up on things, and at that time I was new to Instagram, and I started following a few accounts that talked about health and women's health and stuff like that. So I started noticing a pattern with regards to plants and the benefits of plants. And so, the more I read, the more I got intrigued, and then I watched a few documentaries on Netflix, and that kind of spiraled me into a world of, oh my God. you know, so that's how I started. So basically, the first thing I gave up, which for me was highly inflammatory, was dairy. So I noticed that within weeks, like I would say 2 weeks of giving up, my daily routine was feta cheese on toast or like literally like a cup, if not more, of yogurt, Greek yogurt for breakfast. So that, I was never one to drink like glasses of milk, but I was always consuming dairy through like cheese or yogurt and stuff like that. So once I gave that up, I noticed within a couple weeks, the first thing was bloating that had gone. Like I didn't feel that, kind of like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable, you know. And then my skin started to clear up. And I thought, oh, okay. So there's something to this, So slowly, it took me 6 months from the day I started to the day I kind of just said, okay, I'm not consuming any animal products. So I went from like dairy, and then I gave up. I think chicken was next because I read so much about hormones in chicken, red meat. And I think the last thing I gave up was pork. Coming from a South American background, pork is a very big part of our diet. So that was one of the last things I gave up. But yeah, within 6 months, I was 51, I think, at the time. Yeah. So I gave it all up. And yeah, now I just celebrated my 58th birthday. And I'm 6 years in, like, fully, fully, fully plant based. I'm like, I sleep. I have no skin issues. I feel so vibrant. Like, I can go to the gym and have like a heavy workout. I do weights more than I ever did in my 20s and 30s. And I don't have that, soreness for a week or 2 weeks, so it definitely, from an inflammatory standpoint, has done wonders. And yeah, so that's
And
basically.
there's a lot of these documentaries around now. I was posting about some actually on Instagram because I've been watching a few of them lately. But I mean, we've got the sort of the longevity ones that are out there, like the Blue Zones one that's just come out, and
Mhm.
but then there's the other ones like I've been watching Seaspiracy and Cowspiracy on Netflix.
Yes.
And there was another one I was watching as well, which I think it was called Kiss the Ground, about soil health and this sort of thing. There's lots of these documentaries around at the moment, and I think people are becoming more aware of what's in foods and what the issues with some of these animal products are. But what I think the thing for me is people always say that they're finding it really hard to do. And it is a bit like you said, pork was a huge part of your life. So it's a big lifestyle change. We can't sort of simplify that. It's a huge change for a lot of people. But how hard did you find it to go plant-based? Or for you, was it sort of you saw the benefits and actually that really helped to sort of motivate you?
Yeah. From a personal standpoint, I'm the type of person that if I see a benefit and I read up or whatever that it's not something that is good for me, I can pretty much go like cold turkey um, right away. Like, that's just my personality. But from a social standpoint, because we have a very social, active social life, that I found the toughest
Yeah.
because, for one, telling our family and friends, my husband, I would say, is what he considers himself a flexitarian. So we don't bring animal products into the house, but if we go out, he will have, whatever's being served. Whereas now, obviously, family and friends know that I'm vegan and they just don't, they'll make an alternative for me. That was, I think, the toughest part, the social aspect of it. And 6 years ago, there wasn't as much in restaurants even as there is today.
Yeah.
Even when we travel, like, we travel quite a bit. I just got back from Portugal, and the amount of plant-based restaurants, fully plant-based restaurant, or options on non-plant-based restaurants is incredible, which I didn't have 6 years ago. And I can't even imagine people that did this 20 years ago. You go to the grocery store and, I don't particularly buy a lot of the, plant-based products that are out there in that, the burgers and all that kind of stuff. I stay away from highly processed foods. They are great alternatives for people that are transitioning. If you want to transition or be part of, say, everyone's having a burger and you want to obviously join in, I will do that, but they're not my go-to. But from a, say, milk perspective, there's a lot of milk options out there now, even cheese options. So yeah, I mean, so from that end, is it tough? Yeah, it's something that you have to decide you want to do. And it's not until you start feeling it in your body and the change and how you feel that you really will stick to it. Because if you're doing it because it's a nice thing to do or it's a trend or whatever, you won't stick with it.
Stick to it. I have that because with autoimmune, obviously one of the first things that we sort of do with any of that sort of side of things is gluten's usually the first thing that we sort of take out. And people always often struggle with it. But
Mm,
once they understand why it's important, and that's part of our job, right, is to educate and explain to people why they need to make meat. A lot of people know that actually they need to take gluten out, but until they
Yes.
understand
Yeah.
why, they don't do it. And I think knowing why and understanding really helps people to stick. It's like a behavior change thing, isn't it? It really helps people to stick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's one of those things like if someone tells you don't touch a stove, it's hot. Well, until you touch it and you feel that it's hot, you're not going to really know what that means.
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't until I stopped consuming these things that I started to really feel and see, the change in my body, my skin, and how I felt that it actually did. Like, I'm never going back to that.
Yeah.
Why would you want to, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, and I think that's just like you said with gluten free, like if you're constantly having those, abdominal and gastro issues and having to run to the bathroom because you're having an episode, like why would you want that? Like if once you give it up you start to feel better, why would you want to go back? So I think that's just like you said, it's human nature to resist, and it's human nature not to want change. Is hard, but at the end of the day, we do what feels good to you, and no matter how much we tell them, listen, if you stop this, it'll make you feel, until they actually experience it, it
Yeah.
won't
That's
happen.
key.
At least that's been my,
Yeah, no, I 100%. I think that's absolutely key, is them actually experiencing it. Is there a food now that I know you said you wouldn't go back to it, which I completely understand, but is there a food now that you can sort of say like, I wouldn't go back to it, but I do miss the taste of something, or is there a certain food that you miss?
if you had asked me that question probably even like a year or two ago, I would probably say seafood, fish. I love salmon, you know, but today, like I was in Portugal and there is seafood like across the board, every restaurant. And my husband was just, digging into these big pieces of, what's their fish there? Bacalao, the
Mhm.
codfish. I didn't do anything. It wasn't like, oh, geez, I wish I could have just a little bite. No, it didn't. But again, I think that just goes with, when you know too much sometimes too,
Yeah,
like
comes with
my
the job.
girlfriend, yeah, who was with us was like, well, what's wrong with fish? Like, and then, it just gets it. You watch Conspiracy and then you just kind of think of everything, even things like you think are just innocent, like say mussels, or like my husband says, well, they don't have a central nervous system, like you should be able to eat them, and stuff like that. But until like and really get involved in the whole thing, then you start to really think, no, it's not okay, at least not for me.
Yeah, for me, if I mean, I'm not fully plant-based. I'd probably call myself flexitarian a little bit. Like I don't eat red meat, so I don't eat that. But I started to move that way, but I
Yeah.
haven't totally gone plant-based. But for me, it would be fish. A lot of people think that it would be something a bit more unhealthy that you'd kind of miss, but for me, it would be the fish, because
Yeah.
I do love fish in my diet.
Yeah.
It's sort of a light meal that I enjoy. I know a lot of people that they don't necessarily maybe want to watch the documentaries, or they don't want to know what's going on in the stuff, because
Yeah.
actually it's easier not to. Because I mean, I can watch the sort of the soil health stuff, and I can watch obviously the meat ones because I don't eat the red meat anyway, and things like that. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm really interested, I'm fascinated. And then I put the Seaspiracy one on, and I sort of was about a quarter of the way through, and I was like, I really don't want to watch this. Because I love eating fish. And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
actually, there was a lot of stuff in that was pretty horrific. And I,
Yeah. Yeah.
even just down to, the way that they fish, and the damage it's causing to the other animals, like the dolphins and the whales and all of this sort of stuff. And I was watching it, and I was just like, oh, I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, it really made me not want to eat fish. And that's why I didn't want to watch the program.
Yeah, that's
But it
right.
and it's that hard thing, isn't it? Of like,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
sometimes we've got to kind of face up to it and actually look at the hard stuff, and learn about the hard stuff, and
Yeah.
you know realize what's going on. I mean, I remember when I was studying, and they were talking about the sort of the where your food comes from, and everything like that, and they were talking about like the abattoirs, and things like this. And I mean, it's really hard to. I mean, I didn't eat meat, so it wasn't from that perspective that it was
Yeah.
tough for me, but it was still really tough thing
Yeah.
to see. It's hard to be faced with, and I think a lot of these things are, and people maybe shy away from them and don't want
Yeah.
to know because it's easier
Yeah.
not to.
Yeah, it's easier not to, absolutely. And it's just human nature. And like, let's face it, like like my husband always says, ignorance is bliss, right?
Mhm.
Because, the less you know, sometimes it's better. But at the same time, you can't just put your head in the sand and just say it's not happening because it's affecting everyday life, and whether you are 100% vegan or not, you are experiencing climate change. And I believe that it has, to do with the way we farm and how we evolved as a race of just not caring. Like people just rather look the other way and say, well, it doesn't affect me, until it does. Right. And then you just blame something else. Right? Or,
I'm big on the sort of the soil health stuff, I guess, that's around that sort of climate change thing. But the sort of, particularly the soil health and the organic foods, not using pesticides, all of this is it's really sort of it's really big for me. And I was watching, I think it was the Kiss the Ground documentary on Netflix, and they were talking about like actually what is the pest, like where did the pesticide come from?
Mhm.
And they were saying like it's the gas that they put in, like it's effectively like the gas that they used in like the gas chambers in like World War II, and it's like people used it to to kill people, and then we're putting it on our food and like in the on the ground that we're growing our food in. And it's like, I mean, it's unbelievable when you listen to it and you watch this and hear some of the stats. I mean, it is amazing. And the damage that it does to the soil, and then the fact that the food is then not taking up the nutrients the same, and we don't get the same from our food. Even plant, this is a problem with plant-based. Even if you're fully plant-based, it's a problem with plant-based food if you're
Absolutely.
not organic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, which is why we have so many issues now with people, for example, B12 deficiencies, right? I mean, that was something that, was kind of just a vegan thing, which is no longer. I mean, more and more people, younger people, it used to be as well that even if you were a meat eater over 50, generally, they recommended you have B12 supplements. But now, given the way our food is farmed, we're just not getting it in our diet the way we used to, so even it doesn't matter if you're vegan or not, B12 is becoming a problem, and a necessary supplement for, humans as a whole. So yeah, definitely our soil, and it all comes down to the bottom line. And I think until we demand more as, consumers, we're not going to get the results. Because I mean, from what my understanding is, glyphosate, I think, is one of the chemicals that is so toxic and is in so much of our foods. It's gotten into our water now that we really, even if we wanted to, always will have a trace of it linked to so many cancers and so many autoimmune conditions. But when you look at that, how it started after the war, from my understanding, is to feed people, because we just had so many people to feed, that this particular way of, cropping the plants and doing this prevented disease, so we got more yield. But today, now it's being used like, among other chemicals, just because it just increases the yield. And now, we have the population, the way it's going, what we're feeding, like the majority of the crops that we grow today go to feed animals, to feed us. Now that just doesn't make sense, how we're like, like clearing land like crazy, our Amazons are practically extinct because we're trying to grow all this, soy. And it makes me laugh when people say, well, no, I don't like, I don't want to consume soy. Your diet is full of soy. Soy is cancerous. Soy is that. And I sit there and I think, oh my goodness, but you're eating meat and chicken and pigs, like pork, and their diet is primarily soy.
Mm.
And it's not the non-GMO soy. It's the crap that's been, sprayed and everything else that's being fed to the animals that you're eating. And yet you don't want to consume soy, and yet, here you are, you're consuming probably more than I
Yeah,
am.
and it's that thing, isn't it, of you're not what you eat, you're what you eat eats.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think education around this topic is so key. And a lot of people, like you said, we just rather look the other way because we assume it's not affecting us. Like, but it's every time you put, your fork to your mouth, what you're consuming is affecting something, someone, you know, and your environment that you live in. Until we make, I think, those demands and better choices with what's on our plate, we're not going to see a change. It's moving. I think there's more awareness today. It definitely is better, but we can definitely do more. Yeah, and I think just with our governments, in Canada, we no longer have dairy as part of the Canada Food Guide, which comes out every 5 years, and it regulates the stuff that gets served to our kids in schools and stuff like that. So that came out, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So it just
Wow.
they took dairy right out of the yeah. So until that happens more like in the US and in Europe and stuff like that, it's going to be a problem. And I think we need to demand more because, like, whether you're vegan or not, there's so many people that are lactose intolerant. Children in schools in the US, especially African Americans, that have issues with lactose to begin with from a genetic standpoint, it's sad when these children are being given, milk at school, and then they sit in the toilet for in the afternoon because they're, in so much pain from the lactose. So, why is this happening? I think education is key and just demanding more.
It's
Um,
amazing that
uh,
the government have done that over there in Canada, because I mean it's certainly not
yeah,
something that we're seeing any sign of really within the in the UK, and I wouldn't think in America either. But
yeah,
it does show that that things are moving, and think we are
yeah,
getting a little
yeah.
bit more of
Everything
that
progress. Yeah,
movement
progress.
forwards. And yeah, and I think and I mean we're definitely seeing a lot more in the way of the sort of the organic farming, and I think as well people are more aware over here in the UK of sort of how farming is done
Yeah,
in terms of sort of even things like the way they move the cattle around the fields, and things like this to keep the soil health and all that. There's a
yes,
lot more of that side of things that I think we're getting better with. I think
yes,
it's slow movement. I think
yeah,
it's a sort of a relatively slow change, but I think there is change, which is a positive. But we're not seeing sort of things like that, like dairy coming out of that sort of food pyramid of for
yeah.
children. So that I mean that's quite progressive. I would
It is, and it was big here, and I'm glad our government took those steps because it is something that, like I said, you don't necessarily have to be vegan. It's just for other issues, just allergies and tolerances, right? So, yeah, but there is definitely, from an organic standpoint, we're not as advanced as Europe in North America. I find that it's very willy-nilly here. So, and I mean, let's face it, it's expensive. Not everybody can afford organic. So you have to kind of pick and choose. And the World Health Organization puts out that dirty dozen every year. And that's a good way to kind of see the 12 that you should be buying organic if you're purchasing those items. And then everything else you can get away with not, right? So that's a good guideline, I think, to follow because, yeah, it is a lot more expensive. And if you're trying to feed a family, it's not always easy. But wherever you can, I think, I think strawberries are consistently number one.
yeah
They're,
really bad
the
around.
highest grade crops. So, having had a child who was asthmatic and had eczema and all kinds of autoimmune type of conditions, yeah, I had to be really careful, so I was very conscientious about stuff like that. Yeah, when I became
Yeah,
aware.
the dirty dozen list I think is a good, if you can't afford to buy everything organic. I mean, I've noticed with our food shops that it's become a lot easier now to buy organic. We can get
Yeah.
it in most of the supermarkets now, have some form of an organic
Some
range.
form of that this is
Yeah.
true here as
Um,
well. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I buy a lot of organic. That's probably 80-90% of what I buy is
Fantastic. Yeah.
organic, but it is more expensive and it isn't always
Yeah.
feasible for people. And like you said, in that case, that the dirty dozen list is a good one to sort of start on.
Yeah.
We
For
go
sure.
we go and stay on. We sort of go away on holiday in the UK, and we go and stay on an organic farm.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
yeah, it's lovely. It's that food to table sort of vibe.
Mhm.
Everything's coming out of the market garden onto your plate, and it's all organic. But we always say you get more full. You actually need smaller portions.
Yeah.
We're always really full on the food there, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it's because it's just got more nutrients in it. It's just
More
got
nutrients, less chemicals.
yeah
Yeah. I find, and I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I believe that these chemicals actually do alter our satiety and our hunger hormones, and they're designed, in my opinion, for that. So I don't know if you've heard, but McDonald's, for example, their French fries. A lot of people may not know this, but they ask their farmers for a particular type of potato, and these potatoes get sprayed with this chemical that even the farmers cannot, once they're sprayed, their fields are sprayed, they cannot go to their fields for 5 days. And even when these things are harvested, they have to be like fully masked and into these like almost like, can you imagine? And this is the type of stuff that is being fed to our children, because how many kids do not, adults for that matter, love McDonald's French fries, right? And yet this is the kind of stuff. So, and is there an addictive type of component to that stuff? I don't know. I'm almost say there is, like, it's just
Yeah, it
the
wouldn't shock
need to,
me.
yeah, it wouldn't shock me. So, yeah. So, yeah, definitely, organic is, like I said, in Europe, far better regulated than it is here in North America, in my opinion. You could see a farm that is organic here and right next door, non-organic. You
Yeah.
know, if this guy is spraying, you mean to tell me it's not going up into the, coming down on over
Yeah,
here?
exactly. And that is a big problem where this farm we go and stay on, they've got enough acres of land, like hundreds of acres of land,
Yeah.
that they don't have, they don't have that problem where they grow things. But I do know that the lady that owns that organic farm, she has been around the farmers and she's talked to other local farmers about the benefits, and she's really tried to,
Yeah.
work around that. And
Yeah.
because it, like you say, it's going to get in the air and then it's going to drop back
Oh,
down.
absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
I
that's a
think we
tricky
are
one. But
more regulated probably here. So you've sort of touched on hormones and the impact that sort
yeah.
of, all of this sort of has with hormone balance. And I know you do a lot of work with women at that sort of perimenopause, menopausal kind of age. So how do plant foods positively impact hormones, and what are kind of the negative impacts that you see from the sort of the animal foods?
Well, plant foods are loaded with more nutrients, things like fiber and polyphenols, all these antioxidants, minerals that you just don't find in, non-plant foods. So from that end, from a hormonal standpoint, you have, and women, and well, people in general think hormones. When you say hormones, you think you're talking about, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. But, we're also talking about cortisol, insulin, leptin, which is our kind of our hunger regulator. It tells the body, signals the brain when we're full. Ghrelin, which tells the brain when we're hungry. All these hormones are deeply affected by, the foods that we eat. So if we're not, feeding the body nutrient dense diet that is filled with things like fiber that feed our microbiome in our gut, and our gut produce these beneficial things like butyrate, these short chain fatty acids that are so wonderful for healing the gut and, keeping that brain kind of access to the gut healthy. These are all things that we don't really look into when it or think of when we think of, our diets. And when we say hormones, people think, oh, it's just the sex hormones, but there's so many other hormones. So, I think the obesity epidemic we have today is just because our diets are so poor and lack all these nutrients and fiber in particular. Like protein is one of those things that I get asked about all the time as a vegan. Well, where do you get your protein? And, you can't be getting enough protein. And I often say to people, if you eat enough variety and you eat enough food, protein is not a concern in any diet, especially in the developed countries. We are over protein. There is no such thing. I have not heard of someone being protein deficient that lives in the developed world, right? So, protein should not be one of the concerns. And there's so much protein in all kinds of, like, beans, legumes, greens. I can get probably, without even thinking, based on how I eat in a day, anywhere from 60 to 75 grams of protein a day. And that is more than adequate. And what people don't realize with protein is that your body can only metabolize 30 grams at a time.
Yeah.
And it's also dependent on your level of activity. So you can sit and eat all the protein in the world and it'll get converted to fat because if you're not working it off in, with, strength training, if you're not balancing it out within meals so to make sure your body can metabolize, 30 at a time. If you wait, like for most women, they'll say, "Oh, I have a toast and a coffee for breakfast and a salad for lunch, but I have, a big 4-ounce, 6-ounce steak or piece of chicken breast for dinner." Well, that may be more than 30 grams. So now what you've done is you've depleted all day of protein. And now you've put this chunk of protein inside that your body can only uptake 30 grams of, and the rest is getting converted to fat. And you're wondering why you're not, first of all, that's not enough calories. Toast and coffee for breakfast is not a balanced meal. A salad, depending on what you put in it, is not a balanced meal. So, these are the type of things that I think getting to, educated on is the protein that you need is far less than the fiber that you're getting, because most North Americans, anyway, and I think it's the same in the UK, are getting 50% of the recommended. So the recommended somewhere between 25 and 35 for women, a little bit higher for men. Most women barely get 15 grams.
Yeah.
And, fiber is such an important nutrient for hormonal balance that women need to understand that, without fiber, you're not, pushing through all the waste. You're not metabolizing or detoxifying or uptaking the hormones. Your body needs to be the proper nutrients to be able to make more hormones, first of all, but also to get rid of the spent or the hormones that are no longer needed in the body. And it can only do that through your gut. And if your gut is deficient, if your liver is not properly working, then all that is for nothing. So, fiber plays such a critical role because you need to feed those, healthy, beneficial gut bugs in order for them to do their job, right? So, another thing that, a lot of women that I deal with is they're not, this might be TMI, is they're not pooping. And we need to talk about poop. you know, it's part of human, cycle. It's what we do. It's part of our, mechanism. What we eat must come out. And, the body needs to assimilate all the nutrients, use what it can, and then pack up what it doesn't and eliminate it. But if we're not eating, if our diet consists primarily of protein in the way of meats and chicken and, all this kind of stuff, and we're not incorporating enough plant foods when fiber is only found in plant foods. So if you're not eating enough vegetables and fruits and nuts and grains to be able to, flush out all this stuff, or drinking enough water, that's another big one, we're not going to have the hormonal balance and the, homeostasis that we're looking for. So that is a big thing for me, is trying to educate women that, before you worry so much about protein, let's concentrate on, how much fiber you're getting, how well your body is not only, assimilating all your nutrients through your gut, but also detoxifying. Recirculation of estrogen is a huge problem, with estrogen dominance. I have women that say their breasts are so swollen, they feel bloated, they've got all these, issues that are directly related to the fact that they have these excess hormones just recirculating, taxing their liver, so yeah, that's my little rant on protein.
Yeah, no, but I think it's true. And I think people forget about fiber. I always ask my list before when I'm doing, when I've got guests coming on, what questions have you got for them on this sort of topic? And the ones that came in for you were, how do I get enough protein in a vegan diet? So that was predominantly the main question that came in from most people. No one asked about fiber, which, we've just talked about, you've just sort of talked about the importance of. The other one that came in actually, which we haven't touched on, was iron. People asking about iron in the vegan diet, because obviously we have, the heme iron from the animal products. It's non-heme if you are getting your iron from your plant-based foods on a vegan
Right,
diet.
right.
Do you find people are deficient in iron when they're on a vegan diet, or how do you sort of advise them to make sure they're getting enough?
Yeah, again, it goes back to similarity to protein. You need to have a well-balanced diet. And a lot of people, think that a vegan diet is adding some vegetables to a plate of rice or some to, pasta, and not taking into account exactly what type of vegetables they're consuming. We need a variety, the eat the rainbow type of idea, right? So we need to ensure we're getting enough leafy greens, enough legumes in the way of, like, lentils and chickpeas and beans and, nuts and seeds, and grains, whole grains like quinoa, oats, whole grain rice. So these are all things that, if you are eating a well balanced diet, iron should not be an issue for you. If, again, you're only being particular in the type of foods that you're eating, then you may run into problems. There are picky eaters, right? So there may be people say, "Oh, I don't like broccoli, I don't like greens, I don't like," so you will run into problems, right? So you need to ensure that you have a well-balanced diet. We could just touch on, the two types of iron. And so heme iron primarily found in animal products, in the muscle and blood of, red meat in particular, organs and stuff like that. And then the non-heme obviously found in only plants. But obviously, like, there is arguments over the absorption. So yes, heme iron in animal products is highly absorbed by the body. So about 35%, I think. Whereas non-heme iron is only about 20%. The difference in the two is that heme iron, the body does not regulate. So you can take in, take in, take in. It does not have a regulator that says you've had enough iron, and excess iron can cause some very serious problems in the body, whereas non-heme iron is very easily regulated by the body. That said, I don't know if you've read, there's a recent study on red meat. And, the World Health Organization did come out and deem, you know, things like processed meats as carcinogens I think it was a year or so ago. But now there's a new study that came out that talks about red meat. So even a whole red meat that we think is healthy in part of a good diet, they're now looking at as for diabetes, the risk of type 2 diabetes increasing with red meat. And they think it's because of the heme iron that is causing the pancreas to misfire, and therefore insulin becomes a problem. So this is very new, and the study is very intense and actually a very good study because they took into account all kinds of factors like BMI, weight, and the lifestyle and diet of the individuals to begin with. And these individuals had a fairly healthy diet in that they ate fruits and vegetables, were active, but still their insulin levels were affected by eating too much red meat. So that's interesting in that that's another issue with heme iron that potentially could be affecting your pancreas and causing you to develop type 2 diabetes. So from that standpoint, I think that, eating enough of a variety in your plant-based diet, you should not run into a problem, and you are less at risk of things like type 2 diabetes or other, chronic and metabolic type diseases, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people always sort of say to me, like, what is the healthiest diet?
Mhm.
What's the healthy one? What should I be? And people love to label diets, don't they? Which I'm not a big
Yeah,
fan.
yeah,
But I think I always say to people, there isn't, it's about healthy
mm,
choices. Whichever diet you have, you could
yeah,
have somebody who is, it's not a case of being either carnivore or vegan, or
yeah.
necessarily, you could have a vegan in front of you who is actually really unhealthy because
Mhm.
they're not, like you said, not eating a balanced diet, not getting all the nutrients, they're eating maybe all the processed vegan sort
Yeah,
of type foods, and things like that. Or maybe they're at, like, eating vegan, but it's McDonald's every day, or, things
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
And then you can have a meat eater that's like really unhealthy doing the same thing with all the processed and foods like that. Or you could have a meat eater that's having a little bit of meat and they're having lots of plant foods with that.
Yeah.
And then that's very healthy. And then a vegan who's eating, like you said, very rounded diet, lots of things in there, getting all the nutrients in, and they've got a really healthy diet. So
Yeah.
it is about the choices you make within whatever label you want to put on your
Exactly.
diet.
Yeah.
And it works both ways, whether you're eating meat or whether you are plant-based. You've still got to
Yeah.
make healthy choices, haven't you, within that
Yeah.
diet?
Within that, yeah, exactly. And that's just it. I mean, will there be a time when everybody goes plant-based or vegan for that matter? I don't think so. And I don't think it's necessary. Like I said, my husband is flexitarian and he's happy that way. And as long as you, I think, use animal products more as a condiment versus the centerpiece of your plate. So instead of having that, 12-ounce steak, why don't you, make that steak part of the entire family's, meal, and you slice it up and now it becomes like kind of like a side part of, your vegetables in a stir fry, for example, you know,
Yeah.
so that now that same 12 ounces is being spread out between four people or something like that. So I think there is ways to minimize our risk of eating too much animal products and, with disease and cardiovascular and all that kind of stuff, issues with, diabetes and cancers for that matter, right? So, is there, like you said, is there one diet that's the perfect diet? No, because it all depends on how you're carrying it out. And I tend to shy away from the term vegan because it automatically puts people off and they think that, all I'm chomping on is salads all day. So, and vegan as a term is not so much, I eat plant-based and I believe in the vegan concept of, do no harm to other living things, and stuff like that. So I think from that end, am I the healthiest person on the planet? No. you know, because beyond what's on our plate, it's our lifestyle too, right? So, how much sleep are you getting? How much exercise? Are you drinking alcohol? Do you smoke? What's your stress levels like? So these are all things that play a part in your health. Your health. You can't just say it's what's on your plate. That's huge, right? But it's not the whole picture.
Yeah. And even
You know.
things like, in the Blue Zones documentary that's come out on Netflix, they're talking a lot about, community and having a purpose in life. And, these things as being part of that sort of longevity and optimal health and,
Yes.
that side of things. And it's like you said, it's a full picture. There's so many more things to take in, but even
Yeah.
things like that are important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've been reading a lot about the effects of sunlight and daylight first thing in the morning and how important that is to set our, internal circadian clock, our rhythm. It will be off if we're constantly, and living. And I think this is the same in the UK. Like when I get up, generally between 6 and 6:30 in the morning, it's pitch dark out now, you
Mm.
know, so I have invested in one of these lights that, replicate kind of daylight to kind of turn that on first thing in the morning and keep my eyes closed for a good 10, 15 minutes to just, allow that to kind of, start my cortisol and, stop the melatonin production and get me awake. And that's become such a routine. And I think it's so important from what I understand for, just like it is to go to bed and have those hygienes when you go to bed as far as, getting off your devices at least 2 hours before, sleeping in a cool room. What's the other ones there? Making sure that you don't drink, a lot before bed so that you're not getting up to pee all night. Stuff like that, um, are important, but more so from my research is that what you do first thing in the morning
Yeah.
will ultimately because of your cortisol, right? So cortisol is a hormone that we normally just say it's our stress hormone, which it is, but it plays a critical role in so many functions of the body that getting that guy set straight early will make your life so much easier, right?
Yeah,
So,
I always tell
you
people to, if they can, sort of first thing, even if it's like having that morning coffee, just get outside and have the morning coffee. And if it's obviously, like you said, here, I mean, it's actually a really nice day here today, and we've got lovely blue sky and sun, which for this time of year in the sort of autumn, winter is unusual. It's usually raining or, not nice and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can't get out. But even,
yeah.
yeah, it's stereotypical, but even having that by a window and looking out of the window, looking outside first thing in the morning, that is, if you can't get out, we have times of year where that is
Yeah,
going to be difficult. But first thing in the morning, just doing that, just get, looking out the window, looking outside, just
yeah,
getting as much of that daylight as you possibly can, even in the bad weather, is still going to
yeah,
be beneficial at getting that circadian rhythm set. And that
yeah,
helps with sleep. And we forget, I think we do a lot of the nighttime routine stuff,
yeah,
and
yeah,
actually the morning routine stuff, people kind of forget about. And mornings are busy as well. Okay,
yeah.
nighttime generally people have got a bit more time to think about it, but mornings
Exactly,
it's,
exactly.
up, it's getting kids ready, it's getting to work, it's all of that
Yeah,
sort of business, and people forget that thing. But actually those first few minutes when you first wake up, that can be
yeah,
really important.
yeah. And what I say to my ladies is like, yeah, we're all busy, but we all have 24 hours in a day. So make yourself a priority. And I think as women, that is a big problem. We don't tend to put ourselves first. And does that mean maybe getting up a half an hour earlier? Yeah, it does. But, it's time that you can have to yourself that, it's for you, whether that's, like you said, getting up, exposing yourself to daylight, doing some, stretching, writing in a journal, just having that, even if it's 15 minutes of undisturbed time that is yours is so wonderful to just setting your day, up for success. Because starting off in that hurried rush kind of, we're already like worked up that, it's no wonder that by 3 o'clock we're hitting that crash because our cortisol has just tanked way too early, you know.
And
So
that's the side of the hormones that, like you said, people forget about. As soon as we say hormones, people think, the estrogen, the sex hormones and all of that. They forget about the kind of the cortisol, and also the, like you said, the impact on, like, with the, crashing at 3 p.m. that, insulin can be involved in that as well. And,
mhm,
hormones is a much bigger picture than just your estrogen levels for women. That's a huge part of the picture, but
yeah.
it's not the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just in general, a lot of studies that are done on these things are on men. And, men have a much more simple kind of hormone profile than women do. They do have the same hormones we do, but they're not affected to the degree that we are. I mean, women are affected monthly with cycles.
Yeah.
We go through things like childbearing years, we go through menopause. So women have a higher, more complex, type of hormone function, and we should be treated differently for that reason,
Yeah. More of
approach.
those life stages, aren't there, to
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
So if somebody is listening to this and is thinking they want to either maybe go fully plant-based, or that's their goal to get there, or they want to just get more of those kind of plant-based meals maybe in the diet. And I know we've had, like, meat-free Monday has been a thing over
yeah,
here, sort of things like that. But if
yeah.
people are wanting to get more of those plant-based foods in the diet, plant-based meals, or go fully plant-based, what would be your kind of 3 top tips for somebody who's starting out on that journey and really trying to, because like we said, it's not easy, but starting out on that journey,
Yeah,
taking those steps, how would you advise
yeah.
them to kind of get started?
I would say focus on what you can add as opposed to what you're going to take away. Because, let's face it, anytime we're told, okay, you got to get rid of this, we automatically get our backs up, or it becomes a, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So, maybe incorporate, an extra fruit in your day, add, more berries to your, yogurt or to your morning oats, or, add an extra salad perhaps, or an extra veggie, and then from there, I would say look at your favorite meals or your family's favorite meal. If it's, for some people, it might be spaghetti and meatballs, and look at ways to veganize that, because there's so many recipes out there and so many ways to convert your favorite meal in a plant-based version of it. And, my son-in-law, who is not a veggie man at all, he's British. So he's been staying with us now. Well, him and my daughter, they just moved back. And so making meals that he would enjoy eating. So he loves bolognese, like spaghetti with bolognese sauce. So I made the sauce and I made with mushrooms. So I ground up the mushrooms and the walnuts and I grated some tofu. I seasoned it like you would any type of meat. So, and then I put it on a baking sheet into the oven until it became like dry and a crumble. And
Okay.
then I put it into my sauce and I served it to him. He had two helpings. He's like, this is delicious. know, and in your sauce, even, you can sneak in vegetables. Like, I whip up things like zucchini, very, you don't even know it's there. It's not offensive. It doesn't have a particular high flavor. You can even put greens, so a handful of spinach in your sauce, because once you whiz it all up, you don't see it, right? So there's ways to incorporate more veggies into your favorite type of foods, right? So I would say that. And then the other thing would be, just don't try to do everything at once, because then you're sure likely to. Just give it all up.
Yeah.
So I would say do something like, the adding of something, and do that for a week or two. And then once you feel like, oh, you know what, I can do this, I can add more, add more. Eventually, what you're going to find is that there's going to be less room for the other stuff. So, you're going to go for less piece of chicken or less piece of beef or less piece of whatever it is that you're having. And you're going to find that your plate is being more primarily plants and veggies and get creative, grill your veggies, if you can. It doesn't have to be boiled or there's, like I said, there's so many beautiful recipes out there, like Brussels sprouts. I hated Brussels sprouts as a kid because my mom, or even broccoli, she literally would boil it with salt and maybe some butter, and it was like, who the hell was eat that? you know, but if you take Brussels sprouts and you season them and you put them under the broiler and they get crispy, you can add a nice, little bit of dressing with some maple syrup, make them, or even a balsamic glaze, now you've got something that it's got good texture, it tastes nice, it's got sweetness. So there's so many ways that you can take your everyday raw vegetable that perhaps you grew up with and transform it into so many delicious things, or hide it for those picky eaters.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think, I think focusing on what you can add in, I think, is always important. You're learning a new way of cooking. I think that's,
Yeah.
that's sort of one of the things, isn't it? And I think it's just finding a few recipes that actually you enjoy, that you can put in maybe weekly and things like that, just to get you started on that. Like, I like the idea of, like you said, taking your favorite meal and veganizing it. You'll feel like you're having your favorite meal. I think that's a really good tip as well.
You're
And
not eating anything foreign, right? Like, it's
yeah,
still something that
yeah.
you are used to eating. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And like you said, going slow. If people are trying to do this, like, don't search for perfection. I think that's,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be perfect
Absolutely.
from day
Yeah.
one. It's like, just start making a few changes and see how it goes. And
It could be as simple as swapping out your milk for a non-dairy milk.
yeah,
I recently invested in a nut milk maker, and I've started making my own milk, and it's delicious. It's there for when I need it. I don't have to worry, oh my God, I didn't get to the market to do it. But again, here I am 6 years in and I just bought the darn thing. So, take your time. There's a lot of alternative. Use the stuff that's out there as transition foods. They are good products out there. Just be conscious of the sodium, the sugar, the fat. Make sure that all those things are in line, because yeah, Oreo cookies are vegan, but they're not good for you.
yeah.
you know? So,
I love
yeah.
that. I think that's really great advice, and I think there's some really good tips there for people. And yeah, I hope everybody listening's really enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have. It's been great to have you on and
Oh,
chat
it's been
through
great having
a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, excellent. I look forward to getting together in person one day.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a great chat.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Good Health Podcast. Do share the episode with anyone who you think it may benefit or who may enjoy it, and help me spread the word by rating the episode or leaving a review. If you want more, you can find other episodes in the series on your podcast app, or sign up to my free newsletter. Not only will you get information on new episodes launching, but we cover lots of health topics. with the Ask Nicole section where you can send in your questions, my favorite recipes, my favorite products, tips and tricks to help you on the road to good health, and much more. You can sign up free of charge at nicolegoodhealth.com/newsletter, also linked below. I hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.